two components to being awake is that you don't bring the past with you. When you are accessing and processing emotions, it's like it never happened. And you also let go. You have non-attachment automatically. You can't hold on to what has just happened and how that felt. And so that makes you process and feel emotions in a different way when you're permanently awake, which is what I'm going to talk about in this video. So imagine that you do something that is a little bit embarrassing. Say you get caught eating something in the fridge by your partner that you weren't meant to be eating, and you get busted and you feel a little bit of shame because of it. So if you're awake, you will feel the shame, maybe laugh. It will come through strong and it will let go immediately, and then you'll move on like nothing happened. It's very simple. Shame arises, is felt, perhaps it's expressed in some way. Maybe you talk about it, you say, oh, you caught me, have a laugh, and then it's let go of. Very simple. When you're not awake, what happens is that shame, the same situation, triggers other times in life when you felt shame. Maybe times that were, very toxic shame, maybe times where there was abuse and you were shamed or you were belittled as a child. It activates this chain within the system, held in the body and the nervous system, of shame. And so although we may not realize that, but it has a much greater impact on the shame that we're feeling in that moment, because it's pressed the shame button. And all the times where we felt shame, where we felt embarrassment, where we felt unworthy, all of this is brought up into the system and bubbling up into the system, making that shame, that incident in being caught in the fridge, feel so much worse than it is. And then it might be too overwhelming to talk about it. And so you might try and lock it down, which again creates more shame, because shame operates in hiding. And you just quickly skittle off so that you don't have to deal with it and you don't have to try and feel it. And you're stuck trying to process this, extreme amount of shame from all the shameful things that have happened in life. So that's the difference between if you've completed the awakening process and you're processing things in a quick way. Shame can be felt. It's felt. There's no backlog. It's like the past never happened. It's just the shame of now, the incident that's happening right now. It's felt and expressed in whatever way, which is healthy, and then let go of immediately, and you move on to something else. There's no backlog here now in the system of all this shame that is trying to come out. So I'll give you another example. So say something really terrible happens. You see a little dog get run over on the road. If you're awake and you've completed this process, you may fall to your knees and cry and wail. And it's overpoweringly strong, the grief and sadness that you feel for that poor little baby right in front of you. It can be very strong, very powerful. You're not immune to feeling any emotion when you're awake. In fact, I would say in some ways you feel it more strongly. Now, you're grieving that you've seen that terrible thing and the loss of that little beautiful creature. You process it quickly. It's out of the system, perhaps even in seconds. It's like an explosion, an eruption of grief. And then you move on with your day. You don't carry it with you. You don't keep reflecting back on what happened. You move on to the next thing. If you haven't completed the awakening process, you might see that terrible incident, and then your system is reminded of, the time that your mother died, the time that your childhood friend died, the time that your first dog died, the time that you had to take them to the vet and put them down. All these very tragic events to do with loss and grief are activated in the body and the nervous system that haven't been healed. And so this grief for seeing this little dog run over, can feel completely overwhelming to be able to process that, because it's not just about the dog that got run over in front of you. It's about all the unprocessed grief in the system has risen to the surface, whether we realize it or not. And that can be extremely overwhelming depending on what's happened in life and how much healing work we've done. And so, of course, it can be just too much to process. Perhaps we just lock it down and we don't want to tap into just how much is there. We don't want to start crying because we feel like we'll never stop crying. And so we push it down. Maybe we try to sound tough. We say, you know, oh, well, that's life. That's what happens. And so we hold on to it. We don't process it in a healthy way. It hasn't shifted. It's just more grief has locked down on top of all the other grief. And so now let's talk about anger. So if you're awake, something might make you angry. You can get angry. I think it takes a lot more to get you angry, perhaps, than before, but it's still possible. You might just have a really frustrating day where it's just one of those days where everything just seems to be going haywire. And it's sort of one thing after another, and sort of pressures building throughout the day. And you reach a tipping point of frustration, of just too many people asking you for too much. You feel at your limit, you've reached a limit. And so you might set a boundary, right? So you're feeling anger and you do something about it. It's action orientated. You say, that's it, everybody. I've had enough for today. I'm going home. You set a boundary in a healthy way. You don't just fly off, right? Or perhaps someone comes up and attacks you. You might fight back. So anything like that is still possible. The fight-flight response is still activating. You can still feel the full emotional range. But the difference is that you will not be bringing baggage from the past to do with anger, to do with all the times you felt disempowered, to do with times where everyone was like trampling all over you as a child, all of that. You're not bringing that. You're just in the moment expressing and feeling what is happening. And then you express and act appropriately for that situation because you're not bringing that emotional baggage with you because you've healed that. So it could be anything. You could push back. You could, say something, but you take appropriate action that's healthy for whatever the situation is. So emotions happen for a reason. And we have an emotional system and are able to process emotions for a reason. And so we just use that correctly when we're awake, like perhaps how it was always intended to be used. So it's not about being too spiritual to have emotions and that you're just sitting there in a meditative position, not feeling anything. It's very much being in the world and experiencing everything and sometimes feeling emotions. Yes, you feel neutral. You feel a state of resting, peace, and happiness most of the time. It is not an emotional roller coaster like being in the dream can be. You're not triggered, basically. So, yes, it's more that you're just dealing with whatever the event is and how you emotionally feel about that. But emotions are there for a reason. They help us to take action. For example, fear. So there's a misconception that you don't feel any fear once you're awake. And there is a lot of fear that you don't feel anymore. Perhaps you've worked through the fear of death. Perhaps you've worked through the fear of life. You've worked through a lot of fear that was unconsciously operating in the system, and all the fear from all the things that have happened in childhood. You've healed all of that. So yes, there's certainly some truth to it. But if a big bear comes up to try and maul you, the fight-flight response will activate. Fear will be felt. Adrenaline will come into the system to help you to try and survive. And we wouldn't want it to be any different. We wouldn't want to just be in a still state, an empty emotional state when stuff is happening in life and we need to take action. So the appropriate thing will happen, the healthy thing will happen, which could be running away, which could be fighting. So being awake is not a passive state. It's not empty emotional state. It is a healthy emotional state. You take appropriate action, and the emotion helps you to do that. So the fear is there for a reason. The fear is there saying, you are under threat, take action from real threats. And so any of the emotional content that is there on behalf of the separate self, such as that thinking, the future planning, worrying about the past, worrying about the future, that's all to do with the separate self's worries and concerns. Emotions that arise from that don't happen anymore because you're unable to believe that there is somebody here that is having those problems. Past baggage, past emotional baggage is healed, and so that isn't being triggered in the system anymore. You're not triggered by something someone says because they look at you a certain way, because you have healed all of that stuff. So you're not sensitive in that way. You're not able to be criticized, and because there's nobody here to be criticized. Someone could attempt to criticize you or belittle you or do any kind of toxic behavior with you, but it doesn't land anywhere because you can't take it personally. So that is really nice to be able to operate like that. It's a very happy way to operate in the world because there is a lot of toxicity out there. There is a lot of people that are very unhappy, very traumatized, very angry, very scared. It is a hard world at the moment. So to not be able to participate emotionally in that way is a very rewarding part of being awake. But you also feel suffering very deeply as well. You feel the suffering of the world as a whole, perhaps groups of people, perhaps animals, certain animals. Your heart is open. And so it's not a non-feeling state. You feel very deeply, but it's not to do with feeling things to do with the personal story. That's the difference. Anything to do with the personal story, it was just seen to be a story. It has been healed. It has been taken out of the system, relinquished from the system. And so it's all about what is happening now, which might be deep grief. Maybe someone just died, you just found out, and you're grieving very deeply. Maybe it is shock about some news that you heard, and it is shocking, and you are processing it. And that is what is appropriate for that moment. But there's none of the depression. There's none of that underlying anxiety, all of the things that were really there, underlying toxic shame from difficult parents, all of that's been resolved. So it is quite a lot different to the way that you operate emotionally when you're awake.